There's lots going on this week. The Vatican announced the appointment of several new bishops here in the U.S. And as you heard, the Pope is wading into the immigration debate in the United States. Here with analysis of that and much more, the Papal Posse, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal, and canon lawyer, priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I want to start with this aspect of the Pope's letter to the U.S. bishops. When Vice President Vance was critical of the bishops' use of government funding for these migration programs, he referenced Ordo Amoris. This is an Augustinian Thomistic principle regarding the appropriate order of love. God first, then ourselves, then our family and our neighbor. Pope Francis made a pointed reference to this in his letter, and I want to get your reaction. He writes, "The true Ordo Amoris that must be promoted is that which we discover by meditating constantly on the parable of the Good Samaritan. That is, by meditating on the love that builds a fraternity open to all without exception, but worrying about personal, community, and national identity apart from these considerations easily introduces an ideological criterion that distorts social life and imposes the will of the strongest as the criterion of truth." Father, the Vice President seemed to be referencing subsidiarity in that comment. What do you make of the Pope's correction here, if you will?
I was surprised by that, Raymond, because this is something that the Vice President just said about a week or 10 days ago, and now we're getting an instant reaction, so to speak. Yeah, the order of love is absolutely consistent with Catholic teaching. We owe God the first place our love, but then we owe family members love, and we have responsibility for them. We have to make sacrifices, and that we don't have to make for strangers. I mean, if I'm a father of a family, I have to put a house, put a roof over my wife and kids. I have to earn money, pay for their clothing and food. I don't have a similar obligation to someone who lives, far away and is not related to me. Now, I'm encouraged to do what I can to help those people, but certainly that could never be to the neglect of my family. So yeah, there is an order of love, and it's basically God's will for how mankind progresses.
Bob, can you remember Pope Francis speaking out this vociferously against a Catholic elected official? I mean, this is rather pointed.
Yeah, it's actually quite remarkable, and it's clear too that this was designed to respond specifically to J.D. Vance, because there's a distinction in that letter saying that the people who have an illegal status, now he admits that this is an illegal status. That's quite an admission, because here in the United States, we're not allowed to call people illegal. We're told that no one is illegal, which is an argument that no one has ever made, but that that's the way that we kind of hear people respond to this massive immigration that we've got. But he admitted that there was an illegal status there, but he said that this should not be equated with criminality. Now, again, this is joking around with terms. It's like saying that people are undocumented. Well, yeah, it's not that they just lack paperwork. No one likes paperwork. They're here having broken a law. So there is criminality. And of course, in addition to that, every country has a right to decide what it regards as criminal and what it doesn't regard as criminal. So no, there's never been, as many people have pointed out, there was never this sort of response to Joe Biden promoting trans and gayness all around the globe via our various agencies. I mean, we had Teddy Kennedy and Nancy Pelosi as Catholics advancing abortion, criticizing the church for not accepting women priests, and yet we got no response from the Pope over that sort of thing. So why this? It just strikes you as particularly political, and I think that that's unfortunate.
Yeah, Bishop Strickland and others have pointed out, just what you mentioned there, that we don't remember, Father, the Pope speaking out when Joe Biden was moving gender ideology or funding abortion abroad, nary a peep. But now that some immigration funds are being frozen and you're enforcing the border, suddenly it's the end of times. Meanwhile, the Vatican just did it. As Tom Homan pointed out, their penalties are stricter than the United States. I'll give you the word there, Father.
Yeah, no, the Vatican in December issued a decree regulating how to deal with illegal aliens in Vatican City State, and it includes their arrest, deportation, and they could even be prosecuted and banned and all the rest. So, no, there's a lot of inconsistency here, because a social problem that is not restricted to the United States has to be dealt with according to the basis of fairness and law. not slogans. And in this letter to the American bishops, the Pope says that everyone has an infinite dignity and that's, kind of surpasses any legal arrangements. Well, no, the fact that have human dignity, but I enter a country legally, that doesn't give me a free ride. I can't say you can't arrest me because the Pope said you can't offend my dignity. No, that doesn't work that way. You violate the law.
Not even
you
in the
suffer
Vatican.
just penalties.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. In the
Look,
Vatican City, what's going to happen? If a mob shows up, are they going to be given tents or are they going to be given the door? I think the door.
Yeah.
We have to learn from action, and that the Holy See is protecting its own interests, which is fine, but it should let other countries do the same.
Yeah, earlier in the letter, Pope Francis makes a comparison between all migrants and the Holy Family exiled from Nazareth. He writes, the family of Nazareth in exile, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, emigrants in Egypt and refugees there to escape the wrath of an ungodly king, are the model, the example, and the consolation of emigrants and pilgrims of every age and country, of all refugees of every condition who are beset by persecution and necessity. And he goes on. This is a reference to Pius XII, who equated migrants with that, with the Holy Family. My question is such a comparison here, is this apt, Bob? And wouldn't this nullify any notion of illegality when it comes to immigration or migration if everybody's Jesus, Mary, and Joseph?
Yeah, as somebody pointed out, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph did not emigrate across a national line. It was all Roman Empire, so it was just kind of moving from Louisiana to Georgia or similar to something like that. Look, and the problem is simply not this. It isn't a matter of one person moving across the border. Tom Homan, in that wonderful interview you just did, talked about how you overwhelm the border agents right at the point where they cross into this country. And of course, that is already a problem. We don't know who's coming in. It could be terrorists, they're cartel members, there are people, sex traffickers, all that is true. But one of the things that the Pope is constantly being emphasizing is that when people arrive in a country, they need to be integrated into the culture. And that's true. And that's one of the reasons why every country, at least used to, try to control how many people came in a given year. Now, we legally allow about 1 million, maybe even a little more than 1 million every year. That's quite a few people. And you were right to say, Raymond, that we're very generous people in that regard.
I want to move on to some appointments of new bishops this week in the U.S. There are two in particular I want to highlight. The former Bishop of Tucson, Edward Weisenberger, has been chosen as the new Archbishop of Detroit, Michigan. He'll replace long-serving Archbishop Alan Vigneron, who turned 75 in October. Bishop Robert Casey, an auxiliary from Chicago, has been appointed the new Archbishop of Cincinnati, replacing Archbishop Dennis Schnurr, who has been beset by a number of health issues. He's 76. Bishop Casey has been serving under Chicago Cardinal Cupich. Father, what do you make of these appointments? What do they tell us about the Pope's vision for what the United States needs now?
Well, I think it's obvious that Cardinal Cupich, who is the Archbishop of Chicago, is also a member of the Dicastery for Bishops, that he is having a great amount of influence with Pope Francis about the nomination of bishops. Because both of those men are from the Midwest, and now they are occupying important positions, archbishoprics, in the middle of the country, in the Midwest. So, Cardinal Cupich's influence is clearly manifested here. And I don't know that much about both bishops, but I think that they are more in policy and practice line of Cardinal Cupich than they would be of other members of the U.S. hierarchy. So I think Cardinal Cupich's influence is quite plainly evident here, and I think as a result we're going to see policies that he favors being given more prominence in the Bishops' Conference.
Bob, right now there are 22 American sees, if I'm reading that right, of the Latin Rite, run by bishops 75 years old or older. 22. That now includes Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York. What do you expect from the next round of appointments to the U.S. episcopacy? And do you imagine they'll follow this trajectory, given that, as Father mentioned, Cardinal Cupich, Cardinal Tobin, Whirl are all members of that dicastery of bishops now?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we're going to see more of the same, at least from what we have seen the last 3 or 4 appointments. They all seem to be kind of pursuing a political line. I'm particularly disturbed about this Bishop Weisenberger, who talked about withholding communion for border guards who were enforcing the law. I mean, it just seems such a politically partisan way to go after people you don't like in the public square. I mean, look, Cardinal McElroy, who's coming here to Washington, D.C., I live outside of Washington, D.C., just said recently that the Trump administration is carrying out a war of fear and terror. This seems to me to be very extreme language. And you start talking about a legitimately elected president of the United States is carrying out a war inside of his own country. This is extreme rhetoric. And I hope that people like him, as they get into the positions, begin to recognize that they have to work with all Americans. Americans, whether he likes it or not, or the Holy Father likes it or not, knew what the alternatives were as we were about to enter into this new presidential cycle. They made the decisions that they did. As I said earlier, large percentages of Catholics, 2/3 of mass-going Catholics voted for President Trump. A majority, about 55, 56% of the Catholics in general voted for Trump. So that's the reality. And they're going to have to deal with this. It's fine to remind people about human dignity, but as Father rightly said, it doesn't really have a lot of purchase. We deserve to respect human dignity wherever we find it, not only with immigrants, people who are here illegally. So look, there's a different conversation that has to be had, and let's hope that a certain reality principle begins to assert itself as these people come into their offices.
Some disturbing news to report. On February 8th, a man recently desecrated the high altar at St. Peter's Basilica. He knocked over a massive candelabra, jumped onto the altar, pulled the altar cloth away. According to a Vatican spokesman, the man had, quote, serious mental disabilities and was handed over to Italian authorities. In Winnipeg, Canada, on February 9th, a man rushed the altar of the Holy Ghost Parish with a knife, attempting to attack the pastor. He then plunged the knife into the top of the altar before being subdued. Father, what do you make of these kinds of incidents and the seeming hostility toward the sacred and the church? And it appears to me that this is on the rise. And what of security, particularly at the parish level?
Right. Well, mental illness and what it drives people to is a really tough nut to crack, in the sense of you can't anticipate it. You don't know what's going to happen. What you can anticipate, in which the St. Peter's thing is very disturbing, is that people are going to try to jump on the main altar. Somebody did that last year. I can't believe that they didn't have a guard stationed, immediately adjacent to the main altar to prevent this kind of thing from happening, because the man got up there, ripped off the altar cloths, and knocked down the candlesticks. It was disgraceful. Now, the real problem that we're facing, particularly in France, is the intentional burning down of Catholic churches. And this is sad to say, often done by immigrants from Muslim countries who have a hostility to Christianity. And this, we had Father Jacques Hamel was murdered in his church a couple of years ago. He's now a candidate for sainthood. So in France, there was a lot of anti-Catholic hostility being expressed, and the authorities, they're not doing enough to stop it, in my opinion. This is something we have to be very conscious of. Religious liberty just doesn't mean the fact that I can go to church. It also means that the government is going to do everything it can to prevent attacks on religious buildings and people.
Yeah, look, I know parishes that now have a group of men who volunteer to basically watch the altar and watch the back of the church, because fearing attacks just like this. And Bob, hostility and violence at churches in America are at an all-time high. According to the 2024 stats from the Family Research Council, an 800% increase in incidents from 2022 to 2023. Your thoughts on this?
As you know, Raymond, I've just written a second book on Christian martyrdom and persecution, which will be out in a few months, and I'm hoping to give Pope Francis a copy in May. It's sponsored by the Aid to the Church in Need. Our bishops carried out a survey of attacks on churches here in the United States, and they found that there were about 375 attacks since 2020. It was 2020 to 2024, in 44 different states in the United States, all sorts of different things: burnings, desecrations, statues beheaded, even in some cases the Eucharist attacked. So you're exactly right that is going on here in the United States as well, and in Canada, partly because of that unverified idea that there have been mass graves of children who were in these Indian schools that the church ran. But it's also in France, as Father Murray said. In my book, I discovered that France loses a religious building once every 2 weeks, so twice a month. A religious building is burned in France, and it's usually deliberate arson, rather typically by Muslims. But it's not only there; it's also in Germany, it's in Italy, it's in a variety of places.
Gentlemen, we will leave it there for now. For commentary by Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, visit thecatholicthing.org. Gents, we'll see you next time.